Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show where I talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Doctor Who, this being the New Year's special, Revolution of the Daleks. A great episode, great special. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. The fact of the matter is, I was so curious how the Daleks were going to pop up in this series. I mean, in this special, and to find out, it's like, oh, because we're literally picking up at first 6 hours after the first New Year's special when they went up, wasn't it? Yeah, against the previous Dalek, and basically, I'd actually forgotten that Jack Robertson was a part of this because he is in the trailer that I saw, but I completely forgot. I was like, wow, I just love that they brought you back. It's like you're continuing just to do your own thing. I mean, granted, yes, he was schemy and scummy about it, but still, I mean, it's not like it was the worst thing he was doing, but obviously, it's all he ever does is about himself. I mean, well, to be fair, someone was murdered so they could steal the husk that, you know, the Daleks use as their vessels, you know? So, I mean, granted, we never found, I would assume that was him because Joan ended up saying, like, oh, I gave you information about them transporting it. So I guess we're just going to skip over the fact that he murdered a dude. You know, I guess they're keeping it ambiguous who was actually a part of that. Was Joan the one responsible for that? Kind of feel more like that was Jack, but regardless, which is going to be complicated to say that we'll refer to him as Robertson so we can, you know, differentiate our Jacks. But the fact is that happened, and obviously, also we had Leo, who's, I'm blanking on, I still can't remember his character's name from, bothers me. It's the actor from Misfits. I saw him most recently in one of the in an episode of Soulmates. I think it was episode 4 specifically, but I was like, dude, it was so cool to see. Was it episode 4? I believe it was episode 4. Yeah, but regardless, I was like, hey, that's so dope. But nevertheless, sorry, I went on a bit of a tangent there. But it's interesting how, like, obviously, so, like, they're using these as, like, kind of, like, I think it's a little winking on to, like, what's going on in the world, but it's just, like, to make, you know, to help police and to keep people safe, and kind of, the world's kind of in chaos right now, so it's kind of like, oh, let's use these Daleks to be kind of like basically a new police force, you know, kind of, the trailer kind of showed that being the case, and obviously, it's a situation where Joan is benefiting from it because eventually she's in the, like, hot seat to become the next prime minister later on down the line. Obviously, they reprogrammed because, like, obviously the Dalek inside the machine is dead, so they're just using AI to control the machines, and obviously they've altered, like, you know, its weaponry so that it isn't actually using weapons, but it's still kind of like, obviously still kind of something to frown upon. But regardless, while all of this is happening, we get peeks into the Doctor being in a prison, and I love the whole situation of her crossing paths with, like, hey, here's a weeping angel, and here's this and that, and different creatures I crossed paths with. I even love her being like, hey, I almost forgot about, I didn't realize you guys are here. I'm blanking on their name. It's the aliens from, like, the beginning of series 6. Those creatures. It's them again. So haven't they popped up more recently? Maybe they haven't. I feel like they popped up more recently. I feel like, once again, so much stuff blurs together, and I'm so bad at, like, remembering so much Doctor Who stuff. I do apologize. But nevertheless, I just thought that was kind of neat. I would assume, like, every cell contains something the Doctor's crossed paths with, both within the confines in the show and outside of it. But the Doctor's been there for a very, very long time. The way she explains it later on is like she was there for decades. But obviously for Yaz, Ryan, and Graham, it's been 10 months. And obviously Yaz is like, okay, we got to use this other TARDIS to find the Doctor and lock in. And she left this to us so we can maybe utilize it to find her. But obviously Graham and Ryan are like, we need to move on. Like, the fact of the matter is, this isn't what the Doctor would want, you know, because we don't know if she made it back. She's actually alive. It's like, well, you know, because if she was, she probably would be back by here now. But it's like, you know, they found out about the Dalek situation because a video leaked of that test from like a year or so prior, you know. So all that's happening. Lo and behold, I didn't know this was going to happen because the trailer didn't show this, and I'm glad they didn't, that the Doctor and Jack meet early in the episode. I'm like, wait, I was like, is this real or is this someone messing with the doctor? And it's like, no, it's Jack. And he's like, oh, I'm here to bust you out. I'm like, what? Prison Break? Yeah! I was so excited because I was going to be so upset because I was like, are they bringing Jackford back for this New Year's special? And I'm like, oh, that's dope. But him and the doctor aren't going to meet. And it's like, they have so much time together. And I'm like, yes! I'm so excited about it. And he's busting her out. And he's like, yeah, I basically had to commit, it took me about 19 years to get put into the cell next to you. So he's like, I've had to commit some crimes. Actually, quite a lot of crimes. And she's like, what crimes? He's like, really? You're going to judge me as I'm breaking you out of prison? And it's just like, because she was almost like, have you had work done? He's like, really? You're going to talk about having work done? I loved it. It's so good to see them together again. It's been so damn long. I loved it. But luckily, he got her out of there. And then, obviously, Graham, Ryan, and Yaz try to handle the Dalek situation. They try confronting Robertson about it, but he was like, I don't know what you're talking about, because obviously he's ignorant to everything that's going on, but it's like, yeah, we remember you, spider guy. But then it's like, oh, they couldn't really get anywhere without the doctor. It's like, oh, this would be a great opportunity to have some psychic paper, but sadly we don't. It's like, so we're going to have to find another way. So while they're doing all this research, the doctor pops up and she's like, hey guys, hey, and I love, it's like, oh, so where are we going? And she's like, to my fam. I also love Jack being like, so where's my room? He's like, you never had a room. He's like, yes, I had a suite, and it's just like, oh, dude, it's so good. But then, the doctor's back, and she's like, hey, guys, I was just, locked up in a prison, and Yaz pushed her, and it's like, you've been going, she's like, how long has it been? So it's been 10 months. It's like, no, she's like, I set the signature to come back to right when I dropped you guys off, and they're like, yeah, but as you know, your TARDIS isn't always the best at kind of landing in the exact spot, and it's just like, obviously for her, and I thought that was so beautiful and sad, because now it creates this point of kind of contention amongst the group, because it's like, they kind of had to move on with their lives without her for the past 10 months, never knowing what happened to her. They're worried about her, but they also had to live their lives, And even Jack being like, ooh, yikes, this is a little awkward. And I even love him being like, hey, there's Silver Fox talking to Graham Girls. I was like, hey. But nevertheless, it's like, oh, there's a Dalek. And everyone's getting reacquainted, and it's just like, oh man. Jack's like, yeah, they're like, Graham's like, so you had an experience with dogs? He's like, yeah, I was killed by one. Like, oh, you look good for a corpse. He's like, thanks. He's like, yeah, but the fact of the matter is, I kind of can die and come back to life. It's kind of actually the doctor's fault, along with Rose. And I was like, oh, dude. Which actually got me thinking. I was like, for a second, I was like, is Rose the last companion he got to know? But I was like, I think he got to know Martha, right? I think Jack was around with Martha. I don't remember if he was around with at the end of series, because I know everyone came together, Martha, Donna, and Rose, but I don't remember if he was part of that gang that got together at the end of season 4. That might have been. I think that might have been the case. It might have been. I don't remember if Jack was there. Once again, that's so long ago. But nevertheless, it's like, oh yeah, but Rose, she's on Earth. Well, a parallel universe, and yeah, it's just like, a what? I was almost halfway expecting Jack to almost list where everyone is, all his different companions. But to be fair, it's like Rose and Martha might be the only ones he really got to know. Especially, obviously he spent more time with Rose, if anything, so it makes sense in the grand scheme of things. But nevertheless, I just thought that was so interesting, and it also set up something. I was like, oh, that seems like they're setting something up there. But obviously, there was a lot of heart-to-heart in this, obviously, between, Jack talking to Yaz, because Yaz went off with Jack. There's also, let's start off with Jack and Yaz. I love that, when he opened the door, he was like, impressive, right? She's like, oh, come on. He's like, thank you. He's like, that's all? And she's like, are you feeling a little insecure? Because you're needing a lot of praise. He's like, do I? I love that. But they had this moment back and forth, because it's like, obviously he's been living in the 51st century and stuff like that. But also he understands what it's like, It's like he can understand, that one push told him a lot. It's like, yeah, it's the complicated thing with, journeying with the Doctor. Either the Doctor will leave you or you'll leave the Doctor, which obviously we've seen that happen both ways. When it comes to the different companions that have been around, some have left of their own volition, some kind of got left behind because of different circumstances, But Jack, he's like, the last time he saw the Doctor, he wasn't sure what the situation was. So he's actually glad to see that she's alive and well, and then everything's good. but it's still that feeling of being left behind. It's scary. And it's almost like enjoy the ride while you can, because it won't last, because one of those two things will happen: either you'll be left behind or you'll leave the doctor behind. And even to the point, Yaz is like, she feels the way that it's like, almost feel like I wish I never met the doctor, but Jack is like, how many people in the universe could say they met the doctor, let alone traveled with the doctor? It's like, it's a special feeling seeing everything that you've been able to see, because for him, it's like, I was able to see way more than I would have ever been able to think I could have, because of Journey with the Doctor, so it's like, there's joy that comes with that sadness, so basically that pain is all worth it because of the adventure, so I thought that was an interesting thing, and just what that means for Yaz, then also like the heart-to-heart that the doctor and Ryan had, and the doctor's like, oh, it's like, oh yeah, the first time I saw you with the yellow beanie, I was like, yeah, you got to be something special, rocking the yellow beanie the way you did. And she's trying to, and it's just awkward because, for Ryan, he's changed in that 10 months. And for the doctor, it's that thing where the doctor is kind of like hoping things hadn't changed. It's like, she's trying to pretend like everything's okay. She's like, yeah, like she had some stuff on her mind. Like obviously they were on her mind. She missed him like crazy. But the fact of the matter is, she missed out on so much because and look, I talked about this previously and I thought was so interesting. It's the fact that Ryan had already been set up for Ryan, like, that, his fear was that he was going to miss out on the life that's here on Earth, because you won't, just because you're traveling with the doctor, life is moving on for all the other people around you. So it turns into a situation of like what you're going to miss out on. Like that fear was already there. So they were already setting that up. And for him, he was able to live his life, it's like, and, the doctor's like, oh, so I guess, I don't have to worry about changing because Ryan hasn't changed. So I haven't changed, because the doctor finally confides in him. It's like, because she's trying to make it seem like nothing happened with the master situation. But she was like, I found out I wasn't who I thought I was. And I thought that was, and I thought it was interesting because Ryan's the one person she confided into, which I'll get to that. Well, I'll go ahead and talk about it. I'm curious, is she eventually going to tell Yaz about that? Because I doubt she even told Jack about it. But it's like, it's something she's kept with herself ever since she learned last season, or last series. But she doesn't, for her, it's like, she's been so solidified in knowing, like, this is my history, this is who I am. She's basically had an identity crisis. She actually explained it to Jack, and I thought this was so fascinating. She was like, I was arrested by the Jadoon, for evading the Jadoon, but then at the same time, they decided to basically charge me for like 7,000 other things. And he was like, only 7? But then it's like, for her, it's like, they arrested me for being me, but at a time where I'm not even sure what that means, because she feels lost. Because it's like, I have no idea how many lives I've lived, like how much of my own history, how much of who I am blissfully unaware, have been blissfully unaware existed, all these different lives I lived and what that necessarily entailed, It's like she's missing a part of herself, But she's like, no, like, because he's like, no matter what it is, like, you'll always be, you're still the doctor. And she's like, I haven't changed, you haven't changed. But he's like, yeah, we have changed, both of us. Like, change can be scary at first, but we're always changing. No one ever stays the same. Things are always changing. Obviously, that's the one constant about life, is that things are always changing. So it's like, Ryan has changed, but he was telling her, like, you don't have to, like, fear it. Like, whether it's confronting your past or doing whatever you need to move forward, So I thought that was kind of it's like, thanks for being my friend. It's like, thanks for being mine. And I was like, the feels. So at the same time, obviously there's a confrontation on many different fronts. Obviously, poor Leo, he had to go and clone the Dalek. Granted, he didn't know what he was doing. He showed it off to Robertson. Robertson was like, destroy that thing. It's ill. It's disgusting. He had the right mind state, sadly, for Leo. Like, Leo just, I guess just the way his mind works. It was just like, oh my God, I discovered the DNA of some species. And it's like he tried to bring it back. I mean, from a scientific standpoint, I can understand, but it's just sad because he didn't know what he was dealing with, And he kind of created the situation that they're in. To be fair, Robertson, it's actually 100% his fault, as well as Jones. But, when it's all said and done, Leo getting possessed, I guess they're just going to be doing that a lot more going forward. The Daleks potentially outside. If they're outside of their suits, I guess we can see them possessing people. I mean, this is the second time that's happened now, so I'm assuming we're probably going to see that a lot more be an element of their arsenal. But obviously, like, they've been he was cloning other Daleks for this purpose, and it's like, okay, so how do we deal with like this mass-produced bunch, especially because their vessels have been mass-produced as well. And I love, like, obviously bringing Robertson aboard the TARDIS, and he's like, how is this? And it's like, Ryan's like, do we explain it to him? Graham's like, nah, I like seeing him squirm, basically trying to wrap his brain around everything. But it's like, they end up finding the Daleks, and obviously this one has, plans to take over Earth, because this is going to be its start to controlling this portion of this sector of the universe, as, Daleks do, the whole, taking over, and killing and doing their thing. But I was actually quite surprised when the Doctor came up with her plan of, like, okay, how she was going to handle the Daleks. It's like, oh, I'll use Daleks to handle the Daleks, which I was like, okay, this is interesting. Basically taking the elite, essentially their death squad, and basically, because, I mean, that is a complicated thing about it's actually a little sad, but at the same time, I mean, it's because they are all about purity, they are who they are. They ended up wiping out the other, because it's like, oh, you're impure, you're mixed with human DNA, ill, gross, you're a so because there is no loyalty amongst Daleks. Like, oh, you might be a Dalek, but you're not a Dalek because you're a mutated Dalek, and that makes you different, so you need to be wiped out. Because anything that's not a pure Dalek needs to be wiped out. So that part of the Doctor's plan worked. I mean, granted, Jack did say it has its issues. The plan has its issues, because it's like, we will be releasing a crap ton of other Daleks. So we're replacing one group of Daleks with another group of Daleks. But the Doctor's like, oh, but we'll find another way around the plan. We just got to make sure they don't know I'm the one that sent the signal. Granted, Robertson, being a scumbag and opportunist that he is, it's like, oh, I'm going to use this opportunity. I'm going to be on the winning side of history. I'm working with the Daleks. It's like, hey, let them know. Let me speak to your leader. Hey, the person that did all that, it was the Doctor. This is a trap. It's like, well, that kind of came as no surprise. But obviously, setting up the explosives on the ship, saving Robertson. At the same time, it's like, yeah, the Doctor's got her plan on how she's going to handle this. But then, like, Yaz is like, explain to me. She's like, don't worry. Like, when have I ever let you down? And then Yaz kind of pauses, and the Doctor kind of looks at her, kind of like, oh, I probably shouldn't have said that. I was expecting Yaz to kind of go off on her. I mean, I guess, like, a lot of her frustration she had already gotten out. But it's like, don't worry, I won't disappear again. But Yaz was like, you will. And maybe not right now, but eventually you will disappear again. You will leave me behind at some point in time, So the Doctor set up the whole situation, leading all the Daleks inside of the... She's such a trash talker, too, being like, oh, you're my pets. Like, oh, you went and did the work that... It's like, the Daleks are not the pet to the Doctor. It's like, aren't you? You basically did what I wanted you to. Led them all inside of the other TARDIS. Basically had it collapse upon itself into, like, the void. Which is so interesting timing-wise, just because the Chilling Adventures of Sabrina dealt with the void and this. But regardless... I also love that line between Ryan and Graham when they're in the ship, being like, he's like, oh yeah, this is up to us. It's like, alien ships should be aware, because first the Cybermen, now the Daleks, like, basically, they should watch out for these bad boys. And he's got his fist out for a fist pump. And then, like, you have Ryan looking at him like, Graham, you need to stop talking like that. It kind of gives him the thumbs up and walks away. And Graham's like, okay. I'm like, I love it. But luckily, Jack and them, along with Robertson, were able to get off the ship before it exploded, when they blew it up. And obviously the rest of the Daleks were taken care of with the other TARDIS. But, and then they're confronting Robertson. It's like, so you got some explaining to do. He was like, I was acting as a decoy. And I'm like, you opportunist. And now it's like, oh, look at him being a great savior and everything. And he's benefiting from it. Because it's like, oh, you might benefit from this by, after all that backlash of like all that stuff you were connected to, it's like, you kind of helped save the world. So it's kind of like, hey, you might be on a fast track to being president again, which I'm like, they're probably setting that up like that because eventually he will become president. And I'm sure that's going to complicate things later down the road. So I doubt we've seen the last of him. He's going to be out and about in this continuity. They may circle back to this at some point in time. You never know. Maybe next New Year's special, potentially. That'd be kind of interesting if they brought him back again to see where his story ends up. And I'm sure he's going to continue to be the opportunist scumbag that he always has been and continues to be. Jack, said his farewells. I even loved hearing like, hey, he talked about Gwen was like, hey, Gwen, which is so interesting because I've seen the actress who played Gwen in that show, We Hunt Together most recently. So I was just like, oh, is this? No. But also, it also kind of leaves a certain thing where you're like, yeah, it's not going to ever answer certain aspects about his, because they'd have to fill in so much continuity, especially him being like, oh, I'm living in the 51st century. So there's like, obviously the story of an immortal having lived so long. It's like, there's going to be so much there that they're going to just probably leave it a mystery. Because obviously, remember the last time we saw Jack was like the final episode of, Torchwood, and that was years and years ago. So there's a lot. Obviously, things got left open there that I guess we're just not going to get answers to. It's just going to be part of the great mystery that is Jack Harkness's life as an immortal. But I just thought that was really nice. He's even saying that he's going to be on Earth. So maybe some more run-ins with Jack. Maybe not. I don't know. I mean, maybe not, just because it is kind of fitting with the theme of kind of moving on. And we see that as the Doctor's like, all right, fam, let's get back onto adventuring. But Ryan is like, no, like he feels like this is where he needs to stay, where his friends need him. This is where he's like, I know it sounds kind of crazy, but I think the world might need me, so I'm going to stay behind. But Yaz is staying with the Doctor, and it's like, oh, he's like, you got over me leaving pretty quickly. And she's like, two hearts, one sad, one happy, but Graham decided, it's like, yeah, he wanted to go see the universe as well, because I'm sure even more so for Grace's sake, be able to kind of live for both of them. But at the same time, it's like, but what matters most is Ryan. It's like, you are my family, and, seeing where you end up, is more important. Because for Ryan, it's like, he finally found out what he wants to do with his life. And it's like, because of you, because of everything we've been through, I've grown so much. And now it's like, the Doctor's like, I missed that 10 months, that time we could have spent together, and now it's gone, And so Graham's going with them, staying behind on Earth. And the Doctor giving them all one last group hug, being like, I'll miss you, fam. And I'm like, oh, dude, like, you knew it was coming, but I wasn't expecting them all to do it I wasn't, first I was like, oh, is it just going to be Ryan? But it's like, no, of course Graham would want to go with him. Especially too, because like Graham even said, he was like, you said it yourself, Doc, at the beginning, that when we come back, we won't be the same. And you're right. They've grown, they've changed, and especially with him and Ryan, where they were at the beginning to see where they are now, like how much they've grown together. And then, there's a, moment as they're, leaving. Obviously, she gives them the psychic paper. So it's like, yeah, you guys take care. You do your thing. But now she's like, maybe I could go back 10 months ago, like a week, like after you guys got back. And like, I can change the timeline. Like, but it's like, yeah, it's being like, it's okay to be sad, And I think for, it's like, honestly, that just, because it'd take away from the growth that they had, because that 10 months away, as Ryan had said earlier in the episode, was kind of a necessary thing. And, it's just, cause all we know that the Doctor was locked up for decades. So obviously in the grand scheme of her life, not the longest time, sure, but still, and now probably regretting a lot of that, especially because, that whole situation got caused because you weren't there, because you were dealing with your own stuff at the time, and you didn't really confide in him like you should have. But like I said, I'm curious, is she going to confide in Yaz completely about that? Like I said, because at least in the confines of the episode, the only person she told was Ryan that we're aware of. But, yeah. So then we have like the Ryan and Graham situation of like, all right, him still trying to ride a bike, but it's like, all right, I'll get it. But it's like, hey, there's stuff happening here. Oh, there's stuff happening here. It's like, oh, let's go investigate. It's like, yeah, but I'm going to do this bike situation first because he's like, after everything we've gone up against, Cybermen, this, that, all our adventures, the fact of the matter is I'm not going to run from like this bike situation. And it's like, all right, we'll get to it then. And, as he's getting on a bike and the light shining a certain way, they both see that like kind of an image of Grace, and it's like, oh yeah, the sun's in mine too, and it's like, oh, like it's good to see where they are, but also to know that hey, we're doing our thing. Hey, Jack's on Earth too, so they might cross paths, in that regard. But that was actually it's a beautiful thing seeing them together at the end, but also it's just kind of sad to know they're not with Yaz. Which is, because like, let's not forget she's also leaving her own family behind. So I'm wondering, is it going to just be her and Yaz, or will they eventually pick up other companions? That's going to be interesting, because I talked about this being such a unique situation because this is the first time the Doctors had this many companions at one time during adventures. So I'm curious to kind of see where things kind of go from here in that regard. It's like, I mean, Yaz already knows there will be a time limit on this. Like, either I get left behind or I leave the Doctor behind. I'm here for the adventure now, but eventually, what does that mean in the long run? What's going to happen? So I'm curious to see where the story goes. Like I said, I had a feeling this was going to happen, but I would have expected all three at once. Because also we have to fill in like. Because, to be fair, it makes sense, too, because Graham and Ryan were the ones that kind of moved on. Yaz is the one that kept being like, no, like, looking for the Doctor, sleeping in the TARDIS, trying to find her. So it makes sense in the end of the day that it was those two that ended up going, because they had kind of moved on when she hasn't. So, doesn't mean she hasn't changed in those 10 months. Now, what those changes necessarily entail, we'll ultimately have to wait and see, but it sets up some very interesting circumstances going forward into the 13th season or series. And, what stories await as the Doctor also still has to confront, like, hey, all the stuff I learned about myself, plus, this new dynamic of just her and Yaz. Like I said, will there be other people? Will there not be? Will it just be her and Yaz? I'm curious to see what this looks like going forward. I mean, is this the last time we'll see Graham and Ryan? Probably, but I mean, even if in that case, it could be like a thing of we never see them in an entire season, but then like maybe one more joint adventure, and then maybe Yaz will end up saying goodbye. Maybe, maybe not. Maybe them saying goodbye has to deal with the Doctor confronting her past, the one that she doesn't know anything about, like slowly but surely, maybe over the course of the 13th season or series. Learn more about that. I don't know. Like I said, it sets up some very interesting circumstances for the 13th season, and I'm excited to see what goes down. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.